Welcome back, everyone, to Being a Contrarian for the Love of the Game. With me, your host, the Wise Hoopo. Today, we're going to explain why all the people saying to cut your ramp are wrong, and how battlecruiser magic is the most fun and cool thing you'll ever do. For those of you who don't consume an unhealthy amount of magic content like me, there's been a growing trend of content creators calling for people to cut the rocks from their decks in favor of just running a lot more lands. This started with notable better player than me, Sam Black. Now, while I'm going to push back against this sentiment during this video, as always, let's actually present this argument in its full force. The proposition of cutting ramp for lands comes from an understanding of both mana efficiency and tempo. Mana efficiency refers to how much mana you both produce and spend in a game. So if you pay 2 mana for a ramp spell and then you miss your next land drop, you're down 2 mana from the person who just played a land in that slot. To pay this back, your 2 mana investment requires you to get to turn 4 before you break even, and turn 5 before you gain any actual advantage. This form of analysis shows one of the reasons 3 mana is so much less appealing for ramp than 2 mana is. If you're playing on curve, 2 mana ramp pays off on turn 4, while 3 mana ramp not only comes down a turn later, but doesn't break even until turn 6, which is quite late to not even have any mana advantage yet. On top of mana efficiency, there's an analysis on the basis of tempo. Now, explaining tempo is a video onto itself, especially in Commander. For now, we're going to evaluate it as how quickly you are moving towards victory relative to your opponents. So if you spend your second turn ramping, and your opponent spends it on a value piece or a threat, then they'll be progressing towards their victory faster than you. They will have the tempo advantage. And due to the snowbally nature of modern threats, this early tempo advantage can be used to build into a faster win than the mana advantage offered by your ramp spells. Additionally, not running ramp forces a deck to keep its curve low and efficient. This increases its ability to deploy more spells each turn, further compounding this tempo advantage. A deck that benefits from this style is my Zergo deck. Since it's an aggro deck, its plan is to win in that 6-7 turn range, which, as we said before, is earlier than a lot of ramp can realize its advantage. Additionally, as an aristocrats deck, it's gated mostly by its ability to generate tokens and find payoffs. It's not really its ability to play big threats. Finally, with that aristocrat style, it makes it very hard to halt its tempo with something like a board wipe, since that's often just as lethal as me attacking. All this accumulates in a deck currently running 38 lands despite having an average mana value below 2 and an incredible 3 mana draw engine in the command zone. This is actually still quite low for this deck building style, but I hope to optimize it further as I get more used to the deck. Something I like about this mentality is that it engages with lands and ramp as two versions of the same thing, your deck's ability to generate mana. This goes well with what we talked about in my lands video, that lands are just an aspect of your overall deck, not a special separate thing. It also helps with a common counter to this high land count argument, which is that CDH decks often push their land count supremely low. While this is true with decks like Ral Monsoon Mage pushing it so low as 23, if you count their overall mana sources, such as rocks and rituals, they actually are normally well above 50 mana sources in their deck. To put this another way, the advice of 12 ramp spells and 38 lands, or this style's recommendation of 43 to 45 lands, are actually far less mana focused than the 20-something land CDH decks people often use as a counterpoint. So, if I like this conception of lands and ramp as two sides of the same coin, and if running no ramp and 40 plus land style is more consistent with greater early game tempo, why do only 3 of my decks adhere to its principles? In fact, of my 32 decks, half of them have 20 or more ramp spells, with mana generation numbers far closer to those aforementioned CEH decks than Sam Black's school of thought. It comes down to a disagreement on why I should switch between lands and ramp spells during deck building. And to follow our constant thread, it really depends on fitting the exact kind of deck you are trying to build. To get into the why of ramp spells over lands, let's go back to my lands video again, where I say that my land count depends on why I'm running the ramp I'm running. This is because I don't think of ramp as acceleration in a generic sense as it's often described, but instead as accelerating to a specific point in my game plan. To do this, I break down ramp further than just card that makes more mana than my curve would normally allow. Instead, I break it into small, medium, and large ramp, which correlate to what stage in the game I'm trying to use it to accelerate into. I think this differentiation is something that most deck builders actually do. Trinket Mage calling out Gilded Lotus in control decks comes to mind, but I think we need to do a better job at justifying this distinction. Small ramp is what most articles are talking about, including the beginning of this video. This is that ramp that's 1 to 3 mana and accelerates you by 1. It tends to eat up your early curve if you want it consistently, and is mostly worth running if you're mulliganing for it. In terms of game pace, I'm using these to accelerate to my mid game. The kind of small ramp I'm running is generally informed by the mana value of my commander, because that's most consistently its purpose. So, if I'm running a 3 mana value commander, I'm probably not running any, as most of those commanders are aggressively slanted, and would much rather have a board presence to immediately capitalize on, rather than more mana. For 4 mana commanders, I tend to run a large amount, 10 to 12, of 1 to 2 mana ramp spells, as likely my deck's game plan pivots on when I get that commander out. Finally, 5+ mana commanders is where I start running those 3 mana options, as they may still accelerate me into my commander, and hopefully that inefficiency is getting me some extra boon that my deck can work with. Next for consideration are those medium ramp spells. These are for taking me from that mid game with my commander to the late game. Its main goal is to allow me to start double spelling 3 to 5 mana cards, or slam cards that can win the game with their own advantage. Cards that fall into this category are 4 to 5 mana, and produce 2 to 3 a turn. A couple things to notice here. These cards have mana values that the ramp spells are accelerating me towards, allowing me to sequence them one into another, compounding my advantage with multiple spells. Additionally, these effects immediately give me access to their mana, allowing me to cast with other spells that compete with my small ramp on curve, or letting me deploy the small ramp I haven't yet played. This is also why I'm generally not scared to compete with my commander's mana value on my curve. And these medium spells set me up for double spelling at those costs. Additionally, when you blow past your commander's mana value before you cast it, often people will be more hesitant to remove said commander, as you can just point out to them that you're immediately able to redeploy it, and they would be wasting their spell dealing with you anyways. Our last category is large ramp. I will admit this is my least played, as its purpose is generally unnecessary, but it's a very common place for commander games and commander players to go to. These cards are trying to end games, usually with decks who require overwhelming resources to actually close things out. I would generally classify them as 6 to 8 mana and providing an obscene amount, almost doubling my overall production, or ideally having built-in card advantage to compensate. The purpose of cards like these is to tell my opponents, any turn I untap with this, I am likely to win the game. I will say, generally I like Haymakers to not need to untap, especially at these mana values, but a good thing about cards like this is that they let you threaten wins continuously turn over turn if they're not dealt with. For this reason, they tend to either end up in my control lists or ones that are susceptible to board wipes that need to just be able to slam a new board over and over again very quickly. Notice again that the previous category sequences directly into this one and directly from the lower one. This is intentional. If we were running this kind of effect, it's likely that we want to accelerate towards it in the deck it's in, as well as the fact that stair-stepping from ramp spell to ramp spell is how you get those insane curve outs that allow you to pump way up above your deck's normal weight class. Something joke about banning the Soul Ring. Alright, so I've walked you through this new way of looking at ramp and how to think about it relative to what your deck wants. However, I haven't really made my case for why you should do it. This seems so complicated, rather than the simple and elegant solution of running 45 lands and curving out, or running 32 lands and ignoring the times that you can't cast your spells. First and foremost, I think everyone would be best served by combining both of these philosophies. But then, let me make the case for mine. And that case hinges on the efficacy of big spells versus efficient spells, or more affectionately, the case for battlecruiser magic in 2025. Before I get into it though, I want to say that if you like this style of analysis, drop a like and subscribe. We're almost at 1,000, which is so cool. It's only been 5 videos. I would have never predicted this. Additionally, let me hear in the comments on how you select the ramp in your deck, or come talk to me about it on Twitter or Blue Sky. Finally, I'd like to say I really appreciate if you found this video insightful that you share it with your friends so you can all play bigger, more exciting Magic. To justify that splashier Magic style, we're going to come at it from both the perspective of power and fun. From the power perspective, to quote our gods and rulers at the format panel, if you're spending tons of mana on something in Commander, it's going to be strong. This is in line with WotC's general philosophy that rates of effect should scale more than linearly, so big spells are not just more efficient on card draw, but also on mana. For a more absolutist evaluation of power, we can pan over to CDH, where a month or two ago, Japanese brewers debuted the deck Semi-Blue, which showed that just jamming the biggest, the swingiest, the hardest to counter effects in the format into a heavily value-focused meta, you could overwhelm these more interactive and efficient opponents, notably without any counter magic present. While I'm aware that this strategy has failed to meaningfully penetrate the NA meta wholesale, its efficacy can be seen in the rise of decks like Atali that are focused on quickly dominating your opponents using the world's chonkiest dinosaur. This all goes to say that the common heuristic of these big flashy spells just being for Timmies who don't know that they could be doing something better couldn't be further from the truth. They are in fact a perfectly viable path to victory. With that covered, the majority of players are well below the level of optimization that is CDH, and very much by choice. For them, I have a fun argument. There's a reason these are the kinds of spells this format was built around. Have you ever slammed a mnemonic deluge off an Aminatau's Augury and then cast 3 of those Aminatau's Auguries? Sure, I could wipe the board with Toxic Deluge, or I could cast Heartless Conscription and I should just take it as my new hand. Laugh at the pathetic blue players and their stupid game changer as you cast Ruinous Ultimatum and secure your board's complete dominance. And, of course, we cannot forget our stompy friends who gleefully slam the biggest, the greenest idiots alive, laughing their way to the bank. I know it's considered the default mode for playing Commander, but that's because it rocks. Additionally, it doesn't have to be associated with the Dirtle Fest that Battlecruiser Magic is historically known for. For an example, my default deck to hand to players I'm teaching about Commander is Xenagos. I tell them to mulligan for a ramp spell and a creature they can cast. I don't hand it to them because it's simple. Devotion can actually be a struggle a lot of the time, nor because it's combat focused. I agree with the school of thought that we are way too quick to throw players into the combat deep end. I give them this deck because every card they play is a threat, and everything they do is attention grabbing. The thesis of this deck is that if every turn I slam a permanent that must be answered, and I give that permanent haste, my opponents will eventually fall over and die. This pairs well with the previously mentioned ramp strategy, as it always gets them the mana they need for that kind of threat to be presented in a reasonable time frame, so they don't feel like others are doing so much while they're doing so little. Sure, Brian has just cast 4 times as many spells as them, but we just clocked him for 16, so who's laughing now? Overall, this deck has successfully run over all 14 new players who have used it, consistently turning into my friend's safety blanket deck they always ask to borrow, while still being one of my favorite bracket 3 lists to show off an old style commander. Now, with this defense of big spells, I think it's appropriate to ask what I think of rituals. If you check my Mox field, link below, you will see them in very few decks. For this, I think it's helpful to show how I personally conceptualize these different mana sources. The lands I see as a source of consistency. I run enough to make sure that I'm hitting my land drops at least until the deck is up and running. We already discussed ramp as accelerating me to a desired point in my game. This is important because, as shown by the Xenagos deck, I'm getting to this point and then applying consistent pressure with a specifically intended amount of value. This gets to my personal dislike of rituals. While they are acceleration, like ramp, they are not acceleration to a point in your game plan. They are acceleration to a specific mana value one time. This is a small but important difference. If the card I ramped to is answered, then I have the mana to play another similarly powerful card the next turn. However, if the card I ritualed to dies, then I have voluntarily 2-for-1'd myself. Now, in the case of things like the earlier mentioned CDH decks, this is fine, since I'm hoping my big spell is winning the game, or at least generating enough card draw and value to be worth the loss if it gets countered. But in a more casual setting, I personally favor the consistency that traditional ramp offers. Hopefully, I've done a good job showing you the fun and power that can be had by beefing up your average mana value. Additionally, I hope it's clear how I conceptualize my ramp, lands, and big spells together to craft a deck that consistently competes at whatever level I'm hoping for. As always, these are just tools to inspire you to think more critically about your deck and its construction, not things that you have to abide by. Though I do hope that I can get a few players off that 10-12 ramp floor I see so many at. Thank you for watching, and bye. Thank you all so much for the success of these videos. I can't believe I'm already at 1,000 subscribers. Tell me what I should do as we kind of mature as a channel. If you want like a Discord or a Patreon, just tell me in the comments or on my social medias. For next video, we're going to finally show you what my actual decks look like directly, with a deck tech on one of my personal favorites.